Feel like something in my soul is just raising. I got a bounce in my step and I hang it up. New persona, I'm hotter than Arizona. My aura corona, and I'll be sicker than pneumonia.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com, down there we like magic. And it feels like I've been gone for a little longer than usual. Hey, Igby, what you doing? It's been like 5 days without a full deck tech, which is crazy. I don't usually go that long, so to make up for the lost time, I'm going to give you a double deck tech today. Here's Blue-White Blinks, aka Blue-White Flicker, aka Blue-White Displace. And today I'm going to give you first a Peasant deck tech. That means it's only going to have commons and uncommons in it. It's going to be standard playable in case you only want to spend a couple of bucks. It's like $10. And I'm going to follow that up with a $150 competitive deck tech where we've got a lot of cool interactions and really powerful creatures, including an infinite combo too. So let me go ahead and start this off. First, a quick primer on blinking for newer players that don't understand what exactly I'm talking about here. Cards like Long Road Home and, say, Eldrazi Displacer is a perfect example. Cards that remove a creature from the battlefield for just a second and then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. What are the benefits of this? Well, the most obvious benefit is that if we blink one of our own creatures, if it hasn't entered the battlefield effect, we'll get that effect again. That comes first and foremost. But there's a couple of finer points of blinking that maybe newer players don't understand that I'm going to run through very quickly. First and foremost is blinking a targeted creature. If they target one of your creatures with spot removal, you can blink that creature, it'll be exiled, it'll come back to the battlefield, and it will no longer be targeted by that removal. It's a whole new creature at this point, and it doesn't remember being targeted by that removal. So in other words, the spell will no longer have a legal target, and it will fizzle, as we call it. Note that this doesn't work with sweepers like Kozilek's Return and Fumigate because they don't target the creature specifically, they just hit everything. So sure, the creature will exile and then come back into play, but then the sweeper will take effect and the creature will die anyway. Number two is blinking a blocking creature. Let's say they swing in at you and you block with a guy and then blink that creature. Well, what happens is that your creature is exiled, comes back, is effectively removed from combat, but the creature that it blocked is still considered blocked. So unless it has trample, it won't deal any combat damage. Your creature won't take any combat damage either, and if it has an ETB trigger, you'll get that too. Finally, and similarly, there's blinking an attacking creature. If they swing in with a creature, and we have a guy like Eldrazi Displacer that allows us to displace their guys, then we can always blink their creature, it comes back into play and isn't attacking anymore. So it effectively removes attacking creatures from combat, a trick that's important to remember. But those are basically the top three things that are important to remember about blinking for newer players. And with that said, I want to move on into the deck tech, because I've probably wasted like 4 minutes here. But I think it was, as long as it was informative, it wasn't wasted. Okay, so now that you got a handle on what we're trying to do here, let me start with the Peasant deck tech, and I'll start with all the cards that blink our creatures for us. Here's 4 copies of Essence Flux, 4 copies of Long Road Home, 3 copies of Aerial Maneuver, and 1 copy of Displace. Now, Essence Flux is the cheapest possible way to blink a creature in this format or pretty much any other, and so I'm going to play the full 4 of here. It's nice because we are playing a lot of creatures that cost 3, 4, and even 5 mana, so it's nice to have a 1 or sometimes 2 mana card that blinks things because you can squeeze it in on top of other plays, depending on how much mana you have. Very important that these cards be cheap. Same thing with Long Road Home. It's pretty cheap too, just 2 mana, and it can make your creatures bigger, as well as providing more ETB effects. So I want to play a full playset of that. I'm going to split the last playset here between Aerial Maneuver and Displace. I really liked Displace as an idea, but the more I played the deck, the less I wanted Displace, because I didn't want to always have to be in a position where I have to have 2 guys. And sure, you can just blink the 1 guy, but at that point, Aerial Maneuver is much better. Drawing a card is insanely good. So I'm going to go with 3 Maneuver, 1 Displace, because I don't know that I want to play more than 12 blinks in the main deck of the Peasant deck here, because that's like a third of the non-land cards dedicated to blinking. So that's a lot of slots taken up right there, so I don't want to use any more, and I don't know that I want to go 2 and 2 on Maneuver and Displace. I think this is the right split. As far as the creatures that we want to displace, at least in the Peasant deck, I think there are 3 that are sort of above all of the other options that we could go with. So I want to talk about those all at one time. We're obviously going to play 4 copies of Reflector Mage in the deck, and 4 copies of Fairgrounds Warden, and 3 copies of Cloud Blazer here. Now, again, Reflector Mage is just super obvious. We're going to obviously play him no matter what, even in the competitive deck. Just still one of the better creatures in the format, even though he took a hit. Now that Company's not in the format anymore, he's still a powerful creature. Fairgrounds Warden is quite good, really, really good removal, and he's even better after boards when we can back him up with a negate, you know. But he's still fantastic removal, especially against a lot of the aggro decks that don't play a ton of removal themselves. So Fairgrounds Warden is fine. It's better than fine, honestly. He's one of the best reasons to play this deck, especially if you're going to keep it Peasant. He's a fantastic card. And then Cloud Blazer is nice. You know, it's like a mini Sphinx's Revelation. Kind of reminds me of Moldrifter too. Just 2 life and 2 cards is not a bad deal, and one of the best ways to get card advantage in the deck. It's good that it's a flying body that provides card advantage and a little bit of life. It's not bad. It has its problems. You know, 5 mana for a 2/2 flyer is not necessarily where I want to be in a format dominated by a 2 mana 3/3 flyer. You know, I'm not quite sure, but Cloud Blazer's ETB effect is enough to definitely give it a spot in the budget deck. There's a couple of cards I just want to play like 2 of here in the Peasant deck because I don't think they're insanely important, but in some games they definitely have their function. So I'm going to play a 2 of Experimental Aviator and a 2 of 3-bit Inspector in the deck. And Inspector was a 3 of. I'm just not really sure how much I like him currently in the format. There's really not much that he can take out on turn. When it used to be he could block like an Expedition Envoy favorably. You know, there are a couple of 1 mana or 1 toughness creatures in the format. He's just not that great anymore. he's still good, you know. 1 mana creature with 2 toughness that survives Liliana is fine, you know, gives you the clue, that's good, fine for displacing because you get to draw more cards, but just didn't seem as important as he was in days past. And then Experimental Aviator, you know, you could switch up copies of this and Cloud Blazer, maybe do 3 Aviator, 2 Cloud Blazer if you're into it, because I do really like Aviator an awful lot. You know, if we can just displace this a couple of times, then we've got a really, really big board brewing. So I do like Aviator, but I gotta say, in the budget deck, I think I like Cloud Blazer a little bit better. You'll notice most of these cards, except for a couple of our Blinkers and Thraven Inspector, all cost like 3 to 5 mana at this point, you know. So we don't have a whole lot of action in the early game, at least so far. So here's my plan. At 2 mana at least. There's 4 copies of Aviary Mechanic and 4 copies of Ninth Bridge Patrol. Now we don't have a whole lot of interaction at our disposal in the early game, so I want to use the early game to start setting up for what we want to do. Ninth Bridge Patrol can get actually pretty stupid big. Over the course of the game, whether creatures are dying or you're blinking them, counters going on it is very, very nice. And then Aviary Mechanic is sort of another blink spell and a way to save our guys from removal, just like all of our blinkers are. So I do like Aviary Mechanic both as a 2-drop that can cover the board in the early game if that's what you needed to do, or just something that you drop in the late game to either protect your guys or get another ETB trigger. So I think Mechanic has just enough play to make the deck. 25 lands in the deck, and I'm not going to go crazy here. Just Meandering River and a bunch of, like, basic lands. That's pretty much all we have to do in this deck. You know, we don't have to spend a ton of money on a mana base. You know, this is fine. And here's your sideboard right here. It's fairly standard, I would say, at this point. You know, Negate, Ceremonious Rejection, both pretty obvious includes. Negate is very good, by the way, right now. I think it could almost make main decks, if not definitely make main decks, because, again, Smuggler's Copter, really good. Sky Sovereign, good. Fleetwheel Cruiser, awesome. You know, people are playing Panharmonicon and Aetherworks Marvel occasionally. Lots of artifacts and stuff, and people are occasionally playing Planeswalkers, too. So, like, this is a fine card, you know, and then also blanks removal in case we don't have a blink spell in our hand. So, you know, Negate is just a really good card right now. Stasis Snare, instant speed removal, and it's particularly good against Emrakul, so remember that. And then Experimental Aviator. And here are your power rankings for the budget deck right here. $10 is all this thing's going to cost you because we use nothing but commons and uncommons, and a lot of that is Reflector Mage. Use like half the deck. Aside from that, a lot of really, really cheap stuff in this deck right here. And sure, the power rankings reflect that in some areas, but we've got pretty good scores in Synergy, you know, and aside from that, we're fairly consistent. Decent defense, we're versatile in some ways, you know, so we can always choose what we want to blink and when we want to blink it. The thing is, the deck doesn't have a ton of power in it, but these blink decks have a lot of tricky plays, you know. Anytime they go to swing in, they have to be nervous. Honestly, a final score of mid-50s, you know, this is 54 right here, is not terrible for the deck that's just going to cost you $10. And as far as $10 decks go, you could do way, way worse than this. There's a lot of synergy in it, and we get to play some fairly powerful cards. Again, Reflector Mage, Cloud Blazer, these are really, really fine cards in the format that feel really good when you play them, and there's a ton of tricks at your disposal. So for $10, not a bad deck at all, and it starts you off on a good path to making a viable blue-white displacer deck in the format. So now that you've seen sort of baby's first blink deck, let me show you the actual competitive version of this, or at least the way I see it. And just like the last deck, I'll start with the blinkers first, and they're going to be far fewer of them in this deck. We're going to play 4 copies of Eldrazi Displacer and 2 copies of Essence Flux, and that is it. We can cut the blinkers by a good bit here because we've got Eldrazi Displacer, and he allows us to blink as much as we want as long as we've got the mana. You know, if he survives multiple turns, he'll blink a bunch. So, you know, in the first deck, we just rely on spells to blink, but in this case, we have a permanent, so we can cut down on the amount of blinkers that we need to play and play more creatures to blink and stuff. So, Eldrazi Displacer, great, obvious pickup for the deck. We're going to play all 4 copies of that, but that being said, I still want to play Essence Flux to have a quick 1 mana instant speed surprise way to blink a creature. You know something else we're going to play before I get to the creatures here? 3 copies of Panharmonicon. I don't want to go for the full 4, but I do want to play the card pretty obviously. Now, I want to clear up, because a lot of players still seem fairly confused here, that Panharmonicon does copy the enter the battlefield abilities of creatures that are entering the battlefield. They copy their own into the battlefield tricks. So Reflector Mage will get to bounce 2 guys, for instance. Fairgrounds Warden will get to exile 2 guys as well. So all of that's really, really good, and we've actually got an infinite combo centered around this card and Eldrazi Displacer. And another card, which I'll get to in just a second. But Panharmonicon is obviously good in a deck that packs nothing but ETB triggers. I want to play it, obviously. Let's get to the creatures that we're playing. There's a bunch of them. There's like 20 different creatures in this deck that we displace for value, and they're all like very good. So let's start with the things that we're still playing from the first deck here, namely 4 copies of Reflector Mage and 4 copies of Fairgrounds Warden. Now these are really the only creatures really that I'm keeping from that first deck. Like I said about Cloudblazer, honestly, you know, 5 mana not necessarily where we want to be in a competitive deck, because it's a 2/2 flyer for 5, and the thing that's warping the format is a 2 mana 3/3 flyer that eats Cloudblazer in combat. So I don't know that I want to do that, but I do still want to play Reflector Mage and Fairgrounds Warden, which are, you know, the problem for them is that they can't take out Copter, which is something you have to do in this format, but we do have ways of taking out Copter. I'll get to that eventually. But Reflector Mage and Fairgrounds Warden are still extremely solid removal plans on turn 3, and I want to definitely play them no matter what. Now, as far as replacing Cloudblazer in the deck, I can't think of a better card than Avacyn. You know, let's play 2 copies of Archangel Avacyn in the deck. For my money, it's a much better card than Cloudblazer. Cloudblazer's still a fine card. Don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people really, really like Cloudblazer a lot, so I don't want to tread on it, you know, too strongly here. But Avacyn, I think, is just a card that matches up much, much better, and obviously, too, you know. We can displace Avacyn and make all of our guys indestructible. Like, you can't, that's ridiculously good. If, for whatever reason, something dies and she'll flip, but we don't want her to flip over, we can always displace her, and that'll reset her, basically. We won't have to lose all of our 3 toughness dudes. That's an important thing to remember. And this can eat Smuggler's Copter, by the way. It's a 4/4 where Copter's a 3/3. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, to play Avacyn right now. At least in this deck. But I mentioned an infinite combo a few minutes back then, and that probably made a few people's ears perk up. We're going to play 3 copies of Drowner of Hope in the deck. Now, not only is this just a great card, honestly, like, a lot of people like Drowner, and it's not hard to see why once you start playing with the card. You know, 6 mana seems pretty steep, but it's got a big body, puts a couple of creatures into play, and there's a couple of things you can do with those creatures. The ability to tap down opposing creatures is fantastic, but the number 1 draw for playing the card in the deck is an infinite combo. If you have a Panharmonicon and an Eldrazi Displacer and this out, you've basically won the game, because when Drowner of Hope comes, well, you've not won the game, but you can make infinite Scions and therefore infinite mana as well. But basically, whenever Drowner of Hope comes into play, if you have a Panharmonicon, you get 4 of those Eldrazi Scion tokens. Well, you can sacrifice 3 of them to pay Eldrazi Displacer's cost, displacing the Drowner. It comes back into play. Look at that. You'll get 4 Scion tokens, enough to pay 3 for the activation cost on Displacer, blink him again. This basically just nets you 1 Eldrazi Scion every time you do it. And it's only a 3-card combo. I know that's kind of Johnny of me, but 3-card combos can work. And this can win you the game if you go infinite on it. It's just an option that's in the deck, and a pretty good option to have. Not to mention that you can just sacrifice as many guys as you need to in this case to tap all of their creatures down, and just alpha strike them with existing creatures on the board that aren't summoning sick. Totally possible. Happens all the time, actually. Drowner of Hope is kind of one of the main win conditions in the deck. We can do it other ways, but once we get the combo going, it's basically curtains. Now, since we have to play colorless mana in the mana base for Eldrazi Displacer, that means we can probably make at least 2 slots for Thought Not Seer right here. Still a really good body on turn 4, and almost any time you play him. 4/4 is not a bad body at all, ever. Especially for such a cheap price, and displaces very well, good against control decks and decks that want to go a little bit longer and keep cards in their hand. So at least want to make a couple of slots worth of room for this, but also don't want to strain the mana base too much. We're playing 3 copies of Glintoness Crane, because this deck also suffers from a problem of not having a whole lot of action in the very early turns. You know, we kind of start on turn 3, and I want to alleviate that problem, so I'm going to play Glintoness Crane as basically 3 more copies of Panharmonicon in the deck. Helps us find that really easily. Blocks pretty well on turn 2 in the air, that's not bad either. So, decent body, helps us find Harmonicon and a creature that we're playing. I'll get to in just a second. So I like Glintoness Crane, and I think that it's one of the better choices we have if we want a good and displaceable creature on turn 2. There's actually technically 2 things besides Panharmonicon that Glintoness Crane can get, and here's one of them. I'll follow up the other one in a second. Here's 1 copy of Sky Sovereign, which, you know, I'm just going to put vehicles in with the creatures, I think, when there's only like 1 or 2 vehicles in a deck. But Sky Sovereign, I think we should play a copy of. So sue me. I just think there's no reason not to play this, and it can be displaced, so that's pretty cool. You know, you have to crew it before you displace it, definitely, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And it can swing in for the win. Just so many awesome things about Sky Sovereign. You'll be probably seeing a 1-of copy of this in a lot of decks this season. And the final creature in the deck, just 1 copy of Torrential Gearhulk. Now, we are playing 6 instants in the main deck, and then after we board, it gets even better. We have more instants to board in. And the instants that we're playing, I think, are good enough to play at least the 1 copy of Torrential Gearhulk in the deck. I like that we can displace him and sometimes play an instant again. That's pretty cool. I like that Glintoness Crane can search him up from the top 4 cards. I like that he's a huge body at Flash. You know, just a lot of reasons I think to play the Gearhulk, but I'm not going to stretch it and play a bunch of copies in the main. As far as those 6 instants, what are they? 4 copies of Immolating Glare and 2 copies of Sky Whaler's Shot. Now, Immolating Glare, I want to talk about this for just a second. I have found that this is a really, really good card right now. A lot of the creatures that we're most worried about in the current format attack us, and our vehicles as well, you know, Fleet Wheel Cruiser and obviously Smuggler's Copter. This can be very, very good against, you know, instant speed. Those cards are going to swing in anyway, so that's awesome. Same thing with like Toolcraft Exemplar, a lot of times Scrap Heap Scrounger. A lot of swinging happening nowadays, and an instant speed 2-mana answer to something like Smuggler's Copter is a very good thing to have. So I actually really, really like Immolating Glare, and I suggest that you at least try it if you're having trouble against these vehicles decks, because it is a very good tool against them. And Sky Whaler's Shot is sort of the same thing, you know, 3 mana instead of 2, but at instant speed can take out, without it having to be attacking, something like a Fleet Wheel Cruiser. Smuggler's Copter, again, very important that we have an answer to that. And, you know, 6 instances just enough to play the 1 Gearhulk in the main too. And this can be very good, by the way. Either of these can be incredibly good to basically flash back with a Gearhulk. So this is my removal suite in the competitive deck. Try it out. Let me know what you think. I think these are both very, very good options against some of the vehicles that people fear so much right now. Here's the land base for you. There's 25 lands in the deck, and this one's a little bit more complicated. I do want to play the Aether Hubs, even though they only tap for colored mana once per game, basically, in this deck. We just got to have something that gives us options to tap for colored or colorless. You know, very important, because we're playing both Thought Not Seer and Eldrazi Displacer. We also have to play the Evolving Wilds in this deck so that we can search up the 1 copy of Wastes, but also still have a way to fix our mana base aside from that. With, you know, we need white mana right now, we need blue mana. Evolving Wilds is a poor man's fetch and can help with that too. Here's the board, and there are some things similar here, but there are some notable exceptions. You know, Cataclysmic Gearhulk didn't quite work out in the main deck like I wanted it to, but it is good against decks that want to go wide, which there are a couple of right now. You know, so it's not the best thing in the world, but it is good in very specific situations against specific decks. So at least a couple copies of Gearhulk in there. Summary Dismissal, obviously good against the big Eldrazi decks, and it's just a fine 4-minute counter that we can then flash back later. With Torrential Gearhulk, making him basically a draining whelp, which is like one of his best functions, honestly. So definitely play some hard counters here. But let's talk about the 4 spell quellers that are conspicuously not in the main, they're in the side. I'll bring up Smuggler's Copter at least one more time in this video here right now. In a format where we're all trying to figure out how to beat a 3 toughness flyer, I think that Spell Queller sort of takes a hit in its stock, and it's not even his fault. It's kind of sad. But I do want to play this against specific decks, but the number of decks that I want to play it against in the main at least, without the fear of losing it, is dwindling. You know, a lot of decks want to either play cards that kill Smuggler's Copter, or even the Smuggler's Copter decks will play like Harness Lightning and Declaration in Stone, which are both things that I don't want to run the risk of, you know, the spell color being hit by. So I think this is more of a sideboard card in the current meta. I'm not totally sure, because like the Jeskai Spirits decks will play this. You know, when I played in Jeskai Spirits, it's fantastic. But at the same time, when it gets hit by removal, you're in some trouble. So I just don't know that it's the main deck card right now that it used to be. Much more of a sideboard inclusion, at least in my eyes. But my eyes are subjective. I try to be as objective as possible, and that's actually what led me to the conclusion to not include Queller in the main deck, to be honest, is that I don't know that right now is the time when we're all trying to kill a 3 toughness flyer. I hope that makes sense. And here are your power rankings for the competitive one. A final score of 66, because, you know, we were able to bring up a lot of these scores here. We're a little bit more versatile and a little bit more resilient because we just have access to better options in the competitive deck. Obviously, the power score jumps up. We're a little bit more synergistic because we have an infinite combo in this deck, and that really helps the synergy score at least a little bit. So this deck is obviously a few steps up in power level from the first one, but it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg compared to a lot of standard decks. It's only going to be about $150, give or take, on TCG Player for this one. It could cost you as much as $165, but that's really not the worst price ever, you know, for a fair standard deck that, if you can get out of the early turns, is going to start giving you a lot of late game return on investment. This is a fantastically fun deck too once it gets rocking and rolling. You got a Panharmonicon out, you got an Eldrazi Displacer out, you're just abusing every creature in your deck. You know, once you get rocking and rolling, this can be a very fun and very frustrating deck for the opponent to play against, at least. So give this one a shot. Let me know how you feel about it, because I think that as long as you can get into those later turns and start doing what the deck is meant to do, this deck can almost win any match. Mostly on the strength of the infinite combo. If you can actually piece that thing together, which isn't as hard as you might think it is, then you can just win the game. Pretty much, you just win the game. So as long as we can get to that infinite combo, we can beat a lot of decks in the format before they get to an Emrakul, say. Or, you know, if we can at least hold out in the beginning of the game against vehicles and red-black aggro, you know, we hold out long enough, we get to that infinite combo and we win. So that pretty much closes the book on Blue-White Displacer, at least for now. You know, let me know what you felt about either of these decks. What are some things that I missed? Am I crazy when it comes to Spell Queller? Let me know about all that and more. You know, if you got any ideas for decks that you want to see, let me know. I've got a couple of things coming up that I'm really excited to present, including a green-white control deck. That seems cool. And a $5 mono-white aggro deck. So let me know what you want to see among all that mess, and I'll go ahead and kick it out onto the YouTube space for you. I'm Dev from SBMTG. If you enjoyed the content, hit the like button. That super helps so much. And I get sick of saying it. You just know at this point that helps Devin. Please do it. And you can also share the content and sub if you're new, so you can get all the deck techs, because that's basically all we do. And I love it. So thanks everybody for all the support lately. We are rapidly increasing in subscribers, and I owe that to you guys, because you actually subscribed when I asked you to subscribe. That's really awesome. We're about to hit 35 as I record this, 35,000 subs, and that is really freaking amazing. So thank you, every one of you. And very soon I think I might put out like a Q&A video, so send all of your questions to this email address right here if you have anything you'd like to ask me. I would be more than willing to answer it, so let me know as far as all of that goes, and I'll see you guys later. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.